The first week of World War II. What do I know? What do I know? They attacked on the 1st of September. My mother at home, she has a newspaper about the 1st of September. My grandpa had that. And I looked at the newspaper, and the attack is kind of just a side note. It's not like a big thing, right? It's just like a little half a page, you know, that they're moving into Poland.
On September 1st, 1939, the German army invades Poland.
Tell me you're British without telling me you're British.
And the Polish-German War of 1930.
Dude, look at that furniture. You know exactly what that room smells like. You ever smelled really old wood with its oil on it? He is Swedish. That guy is British.
9 begins. What? Did you think I was going to say something else? Because that's all it is. A war, an undeclared war between 2 European nations. My name is Indy Nidell, and this channel, for the next 6 years,
that sounds cool.
is going to cover the events of that war week by week in real time as it grows and spirals into the deadliest conflict in human history. I know that some of you will point out that the events in Japan and China in the 1930s are part and parcel of the Second World War. Some see the Spanish Civil War as a beginning point, and some see the years 1914 to 1945 as a second 30 Years' War. All these arguments have merit, but I'm going to start here on September 1st, 1939, at the beginning of the Polish-German War. Though it was actually supposed to begin already at the beginning of the week. On August 25th, Adolf Hitler orders the German attack to begin the 26th, but cancels the order at the last minute after...
Dude, that's literally in Counter-Strike. I'm so German. Look at him. And imagine it's Tommy playing Counter-Strike.
Orders the German attack to begin the 26th.
Jesus.
But cancels the order at the last minute after learning Britain and Poland have signed a formal alliance and that Benito Mussolini would not bring Italy into a war at this point on Germany's side. But on the 31st, Hitler decides to invade the following day. He signs the order at noon, and German troops move to the border. At 8 p.m., the radio station at Gleiwitz is attacked.
Does that still exist? That still exists nowadays. Oh, wow. That's what it looked like back then. And now it's like a memorial or something, I guess?
The attackers are SS men dressed in Polish uniforms. SS is Schutzstaffel.
It's now a museum.
A Nazi paramilitary organization used for security, surveillance, and terror.
Oh, God, that's...
They leave behind the bodies of some concentration camps.
When you reach that level, man, that you shoot unarmed civilians, man, Russia, USA, yeah. That's like, fucking hell, man.
Inmates in Polish
What humans are capable of, huh?
When German troops begin their advance across the border the next morning, Hitler gives this Polish attack as one of the reasons for invasion.
You could do IRL content, visit a radio station. I have certain ideas in my head, and I don't know how to do it, though, because the internet will die. I have ideas of cool content where I drive to Poland and we look at certain stuff. We visit my great-grandpa's grave. A guy in chat actually found his grave. He was a soldier. We could go to these museums. I would A, need to make sure the internet works with IRL streaming. I will B, probably have to call the museum and ask if I can stream in there and stuff. I even live close to a World War II museum, and I actually was thinking of talking to them if I would be allowed to stream in there.
That same evening, the Soviet Union, who had signed a sort of neutrality pact with Germany just over a week ago, beats the Japanese army far to the east. In fighting on the Mongolian border, Georgy Zhukov's forces overcome the final resistance of the Japanese 6th Army at Khalkhin Gol. So, as one war is coming to an end, another is beginning. Now, that Soviet-Japanese conflict is an undeclared war that has gone on for several months along the border. Although there'd been tension since Japan occupied Manchuria in 1931 and set up the puppet state of Manchuria.
Every time I watch videos like this, I just want to play more HOI4.
More frequent border clashes.
Unfortunately, we're playing My Little Pony in a
few weeks, and we'll also cover Japan's invasion and war with China in between two wars. But here, in 1939, the Japanese on one side, and the Mongolians and Russians on the other, have different ideas as to what the actual
no one had armor, bro.
Is.
You just
the
have
fighting
basic
had
clothing.
escalated over the summer, but had become a stalemate by the end of July. Zhukov broke that stalemate by attacking on August 20th with artillery and aircraft in the first fighter-bomber offensive in Soviet history. Over 50,000 Soviet and Mongolian troops
I love how many pictures he has. That's so cool.
of the Khalkhin Gol River. As the infantry crossed the river, and
seems to be a good channel,
and the artillery pinned down the Japanese center, armored units went around the flanks and encircled the Japanese from both sides. They were unable to break free, and the Russians kept hitting them with artillery, and by now, the Japanese forces on the Mongolian side of the border are destroyed. On September 15th, Japan and the Soviet Union will agree to a ceasefire. I mentioned that Germany and the Soviet Union had signed a pact, and they had, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, named after the two nations' foreign ministers who signed it. This was a
Dude, we literally live in a world now where YouTube content teaches you more than a teacher in school. And nothing against the teachers, they just don't have time, right? But watching this stuff educates you so hard, man. Education nowadays with YouTube really becomes very visual.
Non-aggression neutrality pact between the two, and it laid out Poland, Romania, Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia into German and Soviet spheres of interest, anticipating some sort of possible territorial rearrangement of these countries in the very near future. Back in April, Stalin had actually proposed a military alliance with Britain and France, which was received with mixed feelings. In July, they began talks, but kept running into the stumbling block of Russian troops entering Polish soil if there was a need to contain Germany. The Poles figured that once there, those troops would never leave, so those talks weren't really going anywhere. But a pact with Germany, well, that would give Stalin what he wanted without having to fight. And for Hitler, it would divide potential enemies.
Yeah, he did good roleplay there.
Neither Berlin nor Moscow
which
saw
will later
Poland
on
as a legitimate state.
stab
and its
it in the
borders had
back.
been established just 20 years ago in the Treaty of Versailles. True, the Poles had beaten the Red Army to secure their independence, famously demolishing it at the Battle of Warsaw. But Hitler and Stalin thought that Poland's whole existence was owed to Allied interference. The Poles, for their part, though they were aware that Russia was the enemy, were not aware of any immediate Soviet plans for Poland and were focused on the obvious threat of Germany. They knew that their army was not up for the task
If this would happen in roleplay game, Stalin player will get one for failed roleplaying by helping a fascist.
of beating the Wehrmacht, the German armed forces. If an attack came, their hopes were for an Anglo-French offensive in the west that would split the German forces. Well, that German attack now comes. On September 1st at 4:45 a.m., Germany invades Poland with no declaration of war. Operation Fall Weiß, Plan White, is 53 German divisions, including 6 armored. General Walter von Brauchitsch is the commander-in-chief, but here's the roll call. Fedor von Bock leads Army Group North, which is made up of the 3rd Army under Georg von Kuchler
That's
and the
how
4th Army under
looks
Gunther
like.
von Kluge. General Gerd von Rundstedt leads...
Chat, do you have the same that when you watch content like this, you just fucking want to play World War 2 games? I want to play Hell Let Loose so hard right now, but too many stream snipers. This makes you want to play HOI4, man. It makes you want to play World War 2 games.
Army Group South, Johannes Blaskowitz with the 8th Army, Walter von Reichenau the 10th, and Wilhelm List the 14th.
Man, the Nazis had style. They looked
is
good.
under Heinz Guderian and Paul von Kleist. Air
They were
support,
dressed well.
some 1,600 aircraft, is led by Albert Kesselring and Alexander Löhr. Rundstedt's forces advance from Silesia, and this is the main German attack. Blaskowitz is on the left, heading towards Poznan. List on the right towards Krakow, with Reichenau the main thrust in the center to the Vistula River between Warsaw and Sandomierz. Kuchler from East Prussia heads south towards Warsaw.
Dude, I know for a fact that both my grandpas were like kind of here. One of them was a NP. He will follow them and will do military police stuff.
And the Bug River to the east. Kluge will cross the Polish corridor and then head south. Polish have 23 divisions, though 7 more are being put together. 1 armored division and not a whole lot of artillery. They do have a lot of cavalry, and this is a good time to dispel the myth that Polish cavalry spent the war attacking tanks with lances. Although this day does see a Polish cavalry charge to cover retreating infantry, which scatters German infantry, but behind that was armored cars with machine guns that kills half the attackers within minutes. There are 2, and only 2 occasions, according to Max Hastings, in which Polish horsemen engage tanks. The Polish reserves are called up August 31st, so they're not yet mobilized. They have 500 planes, but these are obsolete compared to the Germans. Polish commander Edward Rydz-Smigwy has his strongest forces in the northwest, especially Poznan and the Polish corridor. His plan is to...
This is also like a roleplay game. Poland should have looked for more allies helping, right? But England and France are like, we can't reach you. I mean, they are allied. They're joining the war, but Poland really stood alone there with land infantry.
Hold the Germans to only gradual gains. However, since he's put his men so far forward, he risks serious defeat if his units are overrun.
I have weird thoughts. Could Poland maybe have anticipated they have no chance and just go into guerrilla doctrines? But how would they do that, really? You just take your entire fucking army and disperse them and make these little groups that have a command structure, and you just do a guerrilla war until the West maybe does something. They did that. Yeah, I know they did that later.
The German method of attack is anything but.
There will be a lot of retaliation, though. Yeah, but the Nazis didn't treat you anyway well, right? German generals admitted after the war, if France fully pushed, they would have lost in 39. Dude, what I think World War II, you might not like this opinion, man, but what I think World War II really taught us is what we're not doing with Vladimir Putin right now, right? You can't let these fascist states do what they want. You gotta fucking... And you have all this sentiment like in Germany, oh, warmongering, we shouldn't support Ukraine. This is what happens.
Air attacks will try to destroy the Polish Air Force while it's still on the ground.
Or it gets worse.
Bombers will go for railways and roads, but also drop their payloads on civilian centers, creating mass panic and confusion. This chaos is made worse by aircraft also machine gunning civilian refugees fleeing from advancing soldiers. Just in the first few hours, the Polish government reports that 130 Poles are killed by air raids. Waves of motorized infantry and light tanks push as far ahead as possible. Heavier tanks make their way through the countryside, bypassing...
That's light tank 1, I think, right?
Eventually, the infantry, supported by artillery, will come after to mop up whatever pockets of resistance remain. Hitler's plan here is not simply to regain territory lost in 1918 at the end of the Great War. He wants to impose German rule on Poland. In fact, behind the infantry, he has sent in 3 SS Death's Head regiments to take care of police and security measures in the new territory.
And I think, but I can't prove it. I cannot prove it. I think my dad's grandpa was one of them. I heard that my dad's real grandpa was an SS fucker, and my grandpa told me a story once where the SS grandpa saw my dad, because he survived the war, but he was alcoholic. The SS great-grandpa saw my father. He looked at his blonde hair and blue eyes and was like, something like, that's exactly what a kid should look like or something. That's like, I don't know, it's really vague, man. I have no idea. But he told that story, that crazy grandpa who was really fucked in the head, man. He would hit his kids, and he was just a fucking horrifying human being. He would be proud of my dad's hair and eye color. And these Nazis were so proud, man, and all they did, they were all alcoholics in the end. And the generational trauma made my father's father and my father massive alcoholics, man. So you very often you see people idolize or romanticize the SS and how cool they looked. But if you fucking met them IRL, you will really quickly understand. You can talk to any old Germans in Germany, man. They all have these stories of these old soldiers, man. They're all fucked. All suicidal, alcoholic.
Today, September 1st, at Sachsenhausen concentration camp, one of their bases, their commander, Theodor Eicke, explains to his officers just what those police and security measures are.
In protecting Hitler's Reich, Eicke explains the SS will have to incarcerate or annihilate every enemy of Nazism, a task that will challenge even the absolute and inflexible... I think there's a book. My mom has just read a book about this. There's a book about an SS guy during that time, and he talks about what they did and stuff, and it's just insane, right? And it always makes you wonder what has to happen to a human being to do this. But it happens all the time, all across the world, right? Look at the massacres in Ukraine. Look at the U.S. shooting civilians with these fucking planes,
which the Death's Head regiments had learned in the concentration.
I mean, Death's Head. Your name is Totenkopfdivision. You know that meme? Are we the baddies? You're literally a villain in a fucking movie, bro.
Camps. Britain and France demand that Germany withdraw from Poland. The British army is mobilized, and the evacuation of young children from London and other areas thought vulnerable begins on this day 1 of the Polish-German War of 1939. Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf, his political manifesto autobiography, that not only should people of the same blood be in the same Reich, but that once this had been achieved, then Germany would have the moral right to take foreign territory. He lays out his policy on page 1. But even though every German couple was given one by the registry office when they married, and even though he had steered Germany towards war for years, a great many people did not take him seriously and chose to believe his recent statements that he did not want war. They should have instead believed him when he wrote this about his plans once all the Germans were part of the Reich. The plow is then the sword, and the tears of war will produce the daily bread for
Who talks like that? It's like a taught in a HOI4 roleplay game. Dude, imagine Hitler was a HOI4 player. He will be the worst role player. Knight! I will attack you no matter what.
September 8th, 1939. Last week, Germany invaded Poland and a Polish-German war began.
What I sometimes wish to see more, something I've never seen my whole life, is more details about the battles. Which unit attacks where, what weapons are fighting, how many people died. I sometimes wish, which I never really came across, is really, really detailed. It's probably not very good entertainment though, for a YouTube video. We always talk about war and stuff, but I wanna, he's gonna talk about it? He will, okay. I'd like to see in detail, what is it like to be a soldier in that shit? What do you do?
This week, in just a matter of days, becomes a second world war. That invasion happened on the final day of last week, September 1st. That same day, Soviet
did he do this in real time? No fucking way. Shit, he did it in real time? Wow.
Forces beat the Japanese far to the east at Khalkhin Gol. So one local war began as another one ended. The European one raged full force already from its beginning. This was the Blitzkrieg, the Lightning War. Blitzkrieg aimed to inflict a total defeat on an enemy through a single powerful offensive. This was to be achieved by speed, firepower, and mobility. General Heinz Guderian's book Achtung Panzer articulated this strategy.
When I was younger, I wanted to read that, but I came to the conclusion, if you are a young fucking guy reading Achtung Panzer, you might have some problems. It's obviously interesting what Heinz wrote there, but I don't know how important it is what he did with tanks back then. It's a bit weird, right? It's a bit weird to read,
avoid the costly and indecisive trench warfare of 1914 to 1918. Now, in World War I, Germany had pioneered shock troop tactics, which were a similar general idea, but pretty much involved just specialized infantry, since Germany had hardly any tanks then, and not many motorized vehicles in general, since they lacked rubber, and no real combined doctrine. The idea then and now was to avoid centers of resistance to maintain the momentum and concentrate on the enemy's rear to break supply.
By the way, if you guys are interested, I heard U-Boat 1.0 will release soon.
And communication
we have some big content soon, man.
Less mobile forces could mop up isolated, bypassed pockets of resistance. Blitzkrieg required...
I can already tell you, when U-Boat 1.0 releases, we are going to do a thing, which I think is fun. We're going to do a survival challenge. I will play U-Boat in September 939, but if I die, we have to delete the save file. We're doing one life, man. Survival mode.
New technology, but also leaders with the flexibility and tactical skill to exploit opportunities as they arose in order to maintain the speed of the attack.
Fast, bro.
On the 2nd, Gerd von Rundstedt's Army Group South is already across the Warta River after a series of quick, costly battles near the border. Krakow is pretty near the front lines already by now. The Luftwaffe spreads chaos and terror in the rear. Since the Polish troops were deployed so far forward, as we saw last week, the German advance is now in their rear, preventing reserves from coming in and ruining Polish communications. Britain sends an ultimatum to Germany. It expires at 11 o'clock the 3rd, and when it does, Britain is at war with Germany. Australia and New Zealand declare war immediately as well. The French declare war on Germany before their ultimatum even expires. South Africa declares war the 5th. It will now be a world war with nations from 3 continents so far participating. On the 3rd, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain forms a war cabinet. Winston Churchill is First Lord of the Admiralty and Anthony Eden Secretary for the Dominions. Those two were the biggest opposition to the appeasement policy pursued by the British
This is what we need nowadays with Russia, man.
That kept giving in to Hitler's territorial demands the past few years in order to preserve peace. Churchill had said earlier this year of that policy, "We have suffered a total and unmitigated defeat. Czechoslovakia will be engulfed in the Nazi regime. We are in the presence of a disaster of the first magnitude. We have sustained a defeat without a war. We have passed an awful milestone in our history." Neville Chamberlain at the same time. My good friends, this is the 2nd time in our history that there has come back to Downing Street from Germany peace with honor. I believe it is peace for our time. Well, Churchill was right.
That guy went down history books as
peace is long gone. On the 3rd, Wilhelm List's forces are beginning to converge on Warsaw, and the Polish Łódź army is in retreat. The World War at Sea begins as the SS Athenia is torpedoed off the northwest Irish coast by U-30, the German sub commanded by Julius Lemp. 112 people die, including 28 Americans.
That was not so clever. I heard U-boaters have the highest mortality rate of all World War II people, with a chance of 50% of dying.
Now, Lemp and his crew Mistake the Athenia
Fuck
for
being
an
a
armed
submarine.
merchant
Nowadays
ship.
it's probably sick. 75%? I thought 50. Nowadays being a submarine is probably sick with all the technology.
But it had set sail before Britain's declaration of war with
Around
over
90?
1,100
Yeah, let's all throw random
passengers.
numbers.
You might expect an American outcry, but American President
fucking
Franklin
babies.
Roosevelt...
Oh man, I'm such a sensitive fuck nowadays because I have a kid. When I see kids suffer, it hurts me so much more now.
broadcast a radio address to the American public saying,
"Let no man or woman, thoughtlessly or falsely, talk of America sending its armies to European fields. At this moment, there is being prepared a proclamation of American neutrality."
That neutrality is proclaimed on the 5th. This week, 39 of the 58 German submarines are at sea. German Commodore Karl Dönitz had hoped for a fleet of 300 before making war with Britain, but he hadn't expected war for several more years. On the 5th, 4 British unarmed merchant ships and 1 French are sunk by U-boats. The British retaliate by sinking 2 German merchant ships. As for the war in the air, 10 British planes fly 13 tons of anti-Nazi propaganda leaflets across the North Sea to drop them on the Ruhr. This is 6 million sheets of paper reading, "Your rulers have condemned you to the massacres, miseries, and privations of a war they cannot ever hope to win."
They were right in the end.
On the 4th, RAF bombers go into action against German warships in Heligoland Bight. 6 of 24 aircraft are lost. At this point, British pilots are under orders not to endanger German civilians. This still seems to make sense, but the German army commanders certainly give no such orders to their men. German Quartermaster General Eduard Wagner even writes on the 4th, "Brutal guerrilla warfare had broken out everywhere, and we are ruthlessly stamping it out. We won't be reasoned with. The harder we strike, the quicker there will be peace again."
Yeah, that's how peace looks like, huh?
But it wasn't at all just the German army doing the striking. By this time, nearly 4,000 officers of the SS Death's Head regiments are ready to conduct the police and security measures in the conquered territory I mentioned last week.
That's the real evil shit.
In fact, on the 3rd, Heinrich Himmler tells SS General Udo von Boyrsch,
dude, that is pure evil,
on the
man.
3rd,
you know, in history, there's often, you have to look at history, how everything was, right? But that is pure evil, man. That is straight up
SS General
evil. And there's no fucking, the winners write history. No, that is straight up evil shit.
Udo von Boyrsch to carry out radical suppression of the incipient Polish insurrection in the newly occupied parts of Upper Silesia. This is a bit bloodier than that sounds, since whole villages were, in fact, burned to the ground. I read in Martin Gilbert's The Second World War that in Truskolacy, they round up and shoot 55 Polish peasants.
And again, man, hate me or not, I don't give a shit. The more I watch this, the more I see so many comparisons, so many lines connecting with the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
This includes a child of 2. 20 Jews are executed in the marketplace at Bierusov. German bombers target Suliov, an undefended small town with a peacetime population of around 6,500, though it has a few thousand refugees as well by now. The bombers set the town on fire, and then low-flying planes strafe the panicked masses with machine guns. Scenes like this will become commonplace over the next few weeks behind the battle line.
Man, I really changed. It's really hard to explain. Dude, when I was like you, 21 years old, I could watch this and it mean nothing to me. I'm like, well, okay, that sucks, I guess. But it's so weird since I have a kid, man. That when you have your own kid, you're so much more sensitive. I'm much more sensitive now for this kind of stuff because I always imagine it's my kid. Like something happens with your brain when you have a kid,
Two wars raged simultaneously. One on the battlefront of armed men, and the other in towns and villages far behind the front line.
Sons and daughters of people, man.
But it isn't just one-sided, just mostly one-sided. The Poles are plenty angry at anything that seems related to the invaders. This week there
Well, but now we're invaded by Poland, man. Everywhere I look, we just have Polish fucking construction workers.
are mass arrests of ethnic Germans who are believed to be a fifth column. On the 3rd at Bygdgård, 1,000 German civilians are massacred, according to Max Hastings, after it's alleged they'd fired on Polish soldiers. Martin Gilbert says that the next day there, over 1,000 Poles are murdered, lined up and shot.
1,000.
The Blitzkrieg continued. On the 6th, Walter von Reichenau's 10th Army, that covered 60 kilometers just the first 2 days of the war, has now penetrated to the east of Łódź. Krakow falls to elements of Wilhelm List's 14th Army. This is a city of 250,000 people. The Polish government and army high command leave the capital, Warsaw. They order the army to pull back to the rivers Narew, Vistula, and San. Within a day, the Narew defenders are ordered further back to the Bug. Also on the 6th, outside Mrocha, 19 Polish officers are shot. They had already surrendered.
What I always wonder is where does this information come from? This has to be from the Nazi side. The Nazis reported everything. Is that kind of dumb? It's like Sauron. It's like, so today we killed 12 elves. We killed 5 dwarf children. Okay, we're very proud of it.
After a fight with a German tank unit. Other Polish POWs are
German
locked into a hut
required them to
that is
report
then
that stuff.
set on fire. Basically, POWs already in the first week of this war do not have any idea what treatment to expect. Geneva Convention rules of war, laid down over the years, are not the rules that the German army is playing by. On the 7th,
how many fucking people are on the ground
crossed the German border near Saarbrücken. Their mobilization is too small to really allow for any bigger action, but these probing attacks will continue for another 10 days. That day in London, the first meeting of the Land Forces Committee of the War Cabinet is held. Churchill proposes the creation of an army of 20 divisions by March 1940. The committee thinks the war will last at least 3 years, so they want to have 35 more divisions by the end of 1941. At sea, the British are already using the convoy system that foiled German subs in World War I. The Polish naval base at Westerplatte surrenders after heavy German bombardment, and at the end of the week, Reichenau's advance units reach the Warsaw suburbs in the late afternoon of the 8th. List's army reaches the River San, both north and south of Przemysl. Heinz Guderian's Panzer Corps is attacking along the Bug River east of Warsaw. It is all-out total war across western and central Poland as the week comes to an end. Nations from 3 continents have now declared war on Germany, making this the Second World War. The war in the skies, the war at sea have begun. And
all of
the
that
war
just in 2 weeks.
Against humanity in the conquered territory.
Fuck that, man. And the human race will never learn. We keep doing this. Everyone does it. Germany, USA, Russia.
Yeah,
but I always believe it's very important that the human race doesn't give up and becomes sad and scared. I think if decent people don't rise up to fight this shit, it will always keep happening. I will never forget one of my favorite quotes ever from Spencer Olchin from King of Queens. Patton Oswalt, he said, "Evil wins if good looks away, man." And that's, you see that nowadays a lot.
Of this war, now 1 week old. And of course, Hitler had already boasted that the Jews would be his main victims. But though the German army is guilty of war crimes, it is the SS units that will run the civilian operations. This week, Adolf Hitler told Army Commander Walter von Brauchitsch that the army was not to interfere in SS operations.
And that opens a big question in German culture, something that has been up in Germany for a long time. What did the soldiers know? Is my great-grandpa a crazy maniac because he killed Jews, even though he was just a normal soldier? I don't know the answer about this. What did the public know? What did the people know? My opinion is the public did know after a while. You saw, I'm going to show you when I do my RL stream. We're doing an RL stream where I show you World War II stuff in my neighborhood. You see everywhere Jews are being abducted. Your neighbors are suddenly gone, taken at night. And you can't tell me the public is like, oh, well, Mrs. Edelweiss is suddenly gone. I guess she's on vacation. They fucking knew, man. The soldiers on the front line, they must hear rumors what the SS is doing behind them. There had to be fucking signs, man. And you have to ask yourself how many just knew they had no power over this, how many had to go with it, how many even welcomed it. It's very, very hard.
I'll end with a quote by Hitler that I found in Max Hastings' All Hell Let Loose. Genghis Khan had millions of women and men killed by his own will and with a light heart. History sees him only as a great state builder. I have sent my death's head units to the east with the order to kill without mercy men, women, and children.
When did he say this? Buddy, he said that, and America goes, oh, we should be neutral. I feel like if someone talks like this, you might want to fucking go all in. He talks like this, and everybody's like, yeah,
children of the Polish race or language. Only in
Jesus
such a way will
Christ.
we win the Lebensraum that we need.
One last, and then...
September 15th, 1939. If you're a nation living next door to a mighty war machine, you might have allies who've promised to back you up in a crisis. But sometimes,
that quote sounded like a Russian propaganda TV
those promises turn
channel.
out to have been empty. Last week, the German Blitzkrieg, lightning war, swarmed across Poland, penetrating to the east of Łódź and even taking Krakow. In the conquered territory, the began its police and security campaign against civilians, which is a nice way of saying terror and murder. Britain, France, New Zealand, Australia, and South Africa declare war on Germany, and the war at sea begins as the SS Athena is torpedoed and sank by a U-boat. Here's what follows. In Poland, the Germans think that by now, most Polish forces have retired east of the Vistula River, but actually a lot of them have regrouped around Kutno. 10 Polish divisions under General Tadeusz Kostrzyba are there with more arriving. They attack across the Bzura River against Kluge's 8th Army. These are seriously heavy battles, and the Poles have success for the next few days, although the tide eventually turns against them. The Germans assemble reinforcements from Army Group South and will win the fighting by the end of the week. Far to the west on the 10th, the first large units of the British Expeditionary Force land in France, though small groups have been arriving since the 4th. Field Marshal Lord Gort is in command. This month, we'll see 160,000 men come to France, right? That's pretty much the same number of men who are taken prisoner by the Germans just this week at the Bzura River.
Holy shit.
By this time, the main focus of the invasion is on Warsaw, the capital. On the 9th, the 4th Panzer Division attacked the southeast Warsaw suburbs, but is beaten back. The German bombers, though, are ruthless in pounding the city. Hitler's generals proposed that Warsaw be starved.
Dude, how happy we have to be that people recorded this, right? This is true history, and it shows, man. Recording, and during war is so important. War journalism.
To surrender, but Hitler doesn't like
how
the
crazy
idea
we have that
of
footage.
A siege of any kind. And once it bombed into
Imagine
submission,
that being your home, bro.
14th,
like your city.
The bombing is even heavier than usual. The
sick.
Jewish quarter is attacked by air as the synagogues fill. On the 11th, the Germans cross the river San. On the 13th, a small German force crosses the Vistula south of Warsaw. The following day, the Germans enter Gdynia, and the Panzer Corps reaches Brest-Litovsk. That day, the 14th, they also enter Przemysl, the great fortress town that saw so much action in World War I. A third of its population are also Jews. 43 of the leading Jewish citizens are arrested, beaten, and then shot. Poland had pinned its hopes for surviving a German attack on Britain and France. Back in March, those two had given guarantees, eventually formalized that if Germany attacked Poland, they would fight.
An attempt were made to change the situation by force in such a way as to threaten Polish independence, why then that would inevitably start a general conflagration in which this country would be involved.
France, for example, had promised Warsaw that they would attack Germany's Siegfried defense line within 13 days of mobilizing. This isn't going to happen. The British had promised that they would immediately begin a bombing campaign of Germany. This hasn't happened, as Max Hastings writes. Both powers' assurances reflected cynicism, for neither had the smallest intention of fulfilling them. The guarantees were designed to deter Hitler rather than provide credible military assistance to Poland. Of course, the Poles believed them. The Polish army was the 4th largest in Europe, so they thought that
Neville's biggest crime is wanting peace like a sane person. What are you insinuating? Obviously, it didn't work very well. I think the human history shows you very easily. You got to prepare for war against tyrants and dictators, etc.
That an invasion would last months at least, but they hadn't fully mobilized this year because the British and French wanted to avoid provoking Hitler. And though Poland has a lot of men in its army, the Germans are way, way better armed and armored. Poland was fairly poor. Its national budget was smaller than that of the city of Berlin. And something else I mentioned a couple weeks ago is coming back to haunt them. Even though the French had told them to concentrate their defenses behind the 3 big rivers at the center of the country, the Poles had chosen instead to defend the entire 1,500-kilometer border with Germany. Part of that had been to defend Polish industry, a lot of which was in the west. But by now, that choice is revealed as unwise as the power of the Blitzkrieg descends upon them. As for relying on more powerful allies, Antony Beevor writes in the Second World War, the fact remains that neither the British nor the French people were psychologically prepared for war, mainly because they had been misinformed by...
Yeah, that's what we see all the time, also with Russia and Ukraine, right? It's hard for Western leaders, and I get that. I understand that, and I should probably be more sensitive about that, that Western leaders need to win elections. And if you go full on, we need to defend Ukraine and fuck Putin up, you lose a lot of fucking votes, right? I get that. But I guess you will then have to try as a society, or as the West, to do certain campaigns, to do certain things, to make people understand and maybe even educate them what's going on here. That if we chill right now, it's only gonna get worse. To educate, right? What appeasement means, where it can lead to, man. Imagine the Ukrainians wouldn't have held. Imagine Ukraine will fall in 3 days. It will get worse and worse and worse, man. And I think I'm a big fan of somehow making the public more sensitive to understand, hey, freedom and democracy is protected, not just by fucking Instagramming and the haha blah blahing, but also by being ready to face evil, man.
Anyone who had tried to warn of Hitler's plans, such as Winston Churchill, was simply regarded as a warmonger.
I see people in my city walk around, warmonger, because we want to send weapons to Ukraine.
And those leaders, like British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, had, during the whole of the late 30s, done nothing but appease Hitler to the point that he had even complained that he had been thwarted of having a war in 1938 because the British and French kept accepting all of his increasing demands.
These guys just fucking laughing.
But Chamberlain and company were okay with a rearmed Germany, partly assuming that other statesmen and politicians shared their values, so they did not understand Hitler's ruthlessness, partly because it would be a bulwark against Bolshevik expansion, partly because there were those who felt Germany had been treated poorly by the Treaty of Versailles, but mainly because they were horrified by the idea of another European war. When Hitler kept saying, and
that's just the thing, right? Obviously, it's easy for me to say this here in my little room, man. This fear just makes it worse, right? It's better to early understand what's going on and doing something about it, which fucking sucks. But logically speaking, it will make it less worse in the end. You know what I mean? But how do you explain it to a human being, right? It's hard, man. I'm obviously just blah, blah, blahing, man. When they say, Tommy, man, you gotta fucking go, or your fucking son needs to go to war, we're going in early. Obviously, it's not that easy, man.
Bring Germans in places like Austria and the Sudetenland back into the Reich. They didn't really see any reason to object. It was not until Hitler annexed the rest of Czechoslovakia back in March that they finally saw that Hitler's claim of uniting Germans was just a pretext to grabbing more territory. That's what finally forced Chamberlain to offer Poland guarantees in the first place. Back at home within Germany, there were plenty of people who had denounced the Nazis pre-war, and some did so about the Polish invasion as well. But there was a real deterrent to that by now. I mean, thousands of people have fled the tyranny of Germany over the past few years, but that's no longer possible.
Very clever to get the fuck out.
Borders were closed
fast.
And new restrictions were placed on movement.
You had to get out fast.
Over 1939, the whole Gestapo system had been spread to the recently annexed Czech lands, and Vienna and Prague were both under hard Nazi domination. Even now on the 9th, 630 Czech political prisoners are taken to Camp Dachau, north of Munich, and the atrocities in the conquered territory continue. I read in Martin Gilbert that on the 8th at Bedzin, 200 Jews die when they're forced into a synagogue, which is then set on fire. But this comes with a twist. The next day, the Germans accuse the Poles of this action and execute 30 of them in a town square.
Jesus, my Christ,
German Quartermaster General Eduard Wagner writes in his diary the 11th, "We are now issuing fierce orders, which I have drafted today myself. Nothing like the death sentence. There's no other way in the occupied territories."
But who are you? You are genuine Eduard Wagner. War crimes. On the other hand, Wagner was deeply involved in German mass crimes in the war of the Soviet Union. In particular, he made a significant contribution to the planning and implementation of the starvation policy against Soviet civilians and Red soldiers. With regard of the blockade of Leningrad, he wrote to his wife, "First of all, we have to let Petersburg stew. What are we supposed to do with a city of 3.5 million that only relies on our food? There's no room for sentimentality here." Jesus. Wagner was responsible for both the military administration of the occupied eastern territories and for the supply of the troops. He also acted as the army's representative, negotiating with the SS. He was well informed about the future planned war crimes. At the end of February 1943, the director of Eastern Ministry, Otto Bräutigam, viewed a transcript of a conversation Wagner had with Heinrich Himmler. In this conversation, Himmler stated that he had planned to have 8% of the French population murdered by commandos after the war. After the war, we kill 80% of foreigners.
Are, of course, many German officers who do not share this view. But what can they do? Even Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, chief of the Abwehr, the German military intelligence. This week, he comes to Poland to see the army in action, right? Well, His officers tell him of massacres, of things like Poles forced to dig mass graves, then being lined up and machine gunned into them. So he goes to Hitler's headquarters train to protest. He sees Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the Armed Forces High Command, and tells him about this. Keitel tells Canaris to take the matter no further because this has been decided on by Hitler himself. Keitel also tells Canaris that from now on, in just the second week of the war, every German army command in Poland will have to have a civilian chief in addition to the military one. The civilian one will be in charge of the racial extermination program. Keitel's words, not mine.
You can't reach higher evil than that, man. That's fucked up. Makes you wonder what if Nazi Germany was without all this bullshit, right? If they would be a bit more Prussian old school and not fucking do this to civilians. But that's not what happened. That is just pure evil, man.
When he meets Hitler. But according to Carl Goethe...
But everybody goes along, man. And it's a very interesting psychological study of the human race. How quickly this happens. How quickly we turn off our humanity and go along with this shit. How many of us will do it if we were in that situation, right?
Hitler,
it's
former mayor
very
of Leipzig.
creepy.
Canaris returns from Poland.
Sometimes I think aliens don't talk to us because they look at our history and they're like ultra afraid of us.
Broken by his country's conduct of the war. What Keitel calls racial extermination is given another name on the 13th as units of the Death's Head SS begin cleansing and security measures. These included, according to its own report, the arrest and shooting of large numbers of suspicious elements, plunderers, Jews, and Poles, many of whom are killed trying to escape. And the week comes to an end, with the Germans advancing ever further into Poland and taking prisoners in the hundreds of thousands. The Poles now felt that they were on their own, though this week Canada did...
Valley of Death in Fordon, in northern Poland, is a site of Nazi German mass murder committed at the beginning of World War II and a mass grave of 1.4 thousand Poles and Jews murdered in October, November 1939.
The French formed a war cabinet, and the Allied Supreme War Council had its first meeting. I mentioned Wagner's diary. Well, on September 9th, Hitler's chief of staff, General Franz Halder, was talking with Wagner about the future of Poland. Wagner would write in his diary.
Imagine going from this to watching My Little Pony.
It is the Führer...
Look at the view count though, you love when I react, man.
And Goering's intention to destroy and exterminate the Polish nation. More than that cannot even be hinted at in writing. There were many German officers who despised Hitler. German officers had prided themselves on being apolitical, but in the 1930s they had been seduced by the idea of an increased military and massive rearmament. And now, well, Anthony Beevor puts it like this. Opportunism went hand in hand with cowardice in the face of
That's
authority.
a quote, man. Holy shit.
19th century German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck once said that moral courage was rare in Germany, and it deserted a German completely the moment he put on a uniform.
Damn, I feel that nowadays, man. Holy shit.
Well, the Nazis had by now managed to get everyone into uniform, even the children.
It's like they're singing for Putin. It's like a bad dream, right? It's like this is not a real. Amazing content. Wow, these videos are so good.
September 22nd, 1939. Germany invaded Poland.
I gotta really tell my mom to bring World War II stuff, man. I have so much World War II stuff for my family. I never looked at it in my life.
At the beginning of the month. And this week, the Polish days of defense and desperation get far, far worse. This week, the Soviet Union also invades Poland.
Владимир Путин, молодец! Политик, лидер и борец!
Last week, the Poles managed to surprise the Germans at the Bzura River, but after a few days of success, the tide turned and the Germans took over 150,000 Polish POWs. In the captured territory, the German war on civilians continued.
Imagine you take any of these people, Polish, Jewish, German, and you teleport them into my room right now, and I tell them, yeah, we're playing video games about that shit. It makes a lot of good content. Dude, it will blow their brains, right?
Though many in the German army were opposed to it, and in the West, Britain began landing troops in France in large numbers. In Poland itself, Warsaw is surrounded by the 16th, but refuses to surrender.
First question,
The
who
Polish
won?
army
I feel like
has
nobody
retreated
won.
eastward.
Nah, obviously, that was... I should take that back. That was so stupid.
When the Soviets suddenly invade. Even Hitler's generals were unaware that this was going to happen. This day, Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov declares in Moscow that the Polish government has ceased to exist. So Soviet troops have occupied eastern Poland to protect Russian citizens in western Belarusia from a 2018 perspective. And because of, spoiler alert, the way the war ended with Russia on the Allied side, many historians have accepted the post-war Soviet Union's claim that they were neutral in the early stages of the war. This is false. In 1939, he made a historic decision to acquiesce in German aggression in return for Nazi support for Moscow's own program of territorial aggrandizement.
Thank you,
Whatever excuses the Soviet leader later offered, and although his armies never fought in partnership with the Wehrmacht, the Nazi-Soviet pact established a collaboration.
Crazy they
and it
filmed
is
that
certainly
shit.
true to the world at large this week in 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union are the twin faces of totalitarianism. Now, Hitler has hopes that the Russian invasion will cause the Allies to declare war on the Soviet Union. And though there is some debate in London for...
Yeah, we always watch history in review. Nowadays, in 2024, we always know what happened, right? But back then, they didn't know. Hitler knew maybe this happens, maybe that happened. It's sometimes good to see history in a presence, which is hard to do, right? The facts are very different than what we know now today.
For example, as to whether Britain's commitments to Poland involved fighting against another enemy, it is only Winston Churchill and Leslie Hoare-Belisha, the Secretary of State for War, who think war with the Soviet Union is something to prepare for. The Foreign Office say Britain's Polish guarantee was only in case of German invasion. The Poles are at first bewildered and then completely outraged that their Western allies have done nothing to help them.
So no.
But you know, what could they really do? It's a grand decision of the Fuhrer.
The one thing you can't deny about Nazis, they were dressed well, man. I swear to God, I don't think I'm allowed to say this. I know somebody who once told me that in their attic, they still have all the Nazi stuff. Apparently, after World War II, you have to give all the Nazi stuff away, but they hid it all. And I remember years ago, I asked them to go to the attic, and they were like, fucking no way, buddy. But that would spoil who it is. Leonard. This man you see on stream is a man I met in real life. I'm not going to say how I know him. I want to protect a little bit of privacy. And I knew him in my childhood. I saw him sometimes for certain reasons. I'm not going to say. And he was the nicest guy. Oh, a huge man, massive hands, massive fucking dude, bro. And he would always come to me, and I was like 11 years old. And he would always say, "Oh, how are you doing, Tommy? How are you doing? Is everything all right? How's the sport?" He would always ask, how's the sport? What? And one day he said, you want to come over to my house? I want to show you something. So we're going over to his house, which was 2 minutes away. And it was a very old house. And it had these big stone eagles. And we go to his office. And he wants to show me the books he wrote about his village. He was very proud of his village. He was very famous there. On his funeral, there was the whole village, man. He was very famous. His family lived in that village for a long time. He had books about the history, who was a fisher. It was really boring. No hate, but I was a kid. I was like, okay, boring. And I'm in his office, which I think he doesn't have many people. And he liked me because I always was curious and cared. And I'll never forget this. Never forget. I'm sitting on that table, and it smells very old in the room, and he shows me all these books, and I'm like, fucking boring. And I look to the left, and there's a small picture of him in Wehrmacht's uniform in the desert in Africa. And I'm a fucking kid. I'm like, well, man, you were in World War II. What did you do? And I will never forget. And suddenly this humble, beautiful giant who is always nice fucking looks at me with eyes you've never seen before. You have no clue, chat. You don't fucking know the way that guy looked at me with so much pain, but also like madness and aggression. I forgot what he said, but he said something like, we don't talk, that shit doesn't matter, boy. That shit means nothing, boy. And I'm just like, okay, let's talk about the history of the village, man. And that guy has seen shit, brother.
Attitude of the Western powers up till now. His offer to solve the Polish question.
But whatever he did, the nicest man, the nicest guy
was so obliging that England and France, if they had really wanted peace, should have pushed Poland into accepting. The 17th is in fact the day that the Poles expect the French to begin their promised offensive on the Western Front. But instead,
That's like me in the Austrian roleplay game. I'm waiting for my teammates. No one is coming. I'm just dying.
the French call off their probing attacks in Saarbrücken. There was going to be a larger advance, but the Polish collapse.
You know what I'd like to see? I'd like to see a video of the average equipment of a World War II soldier.
It makes it seem pointless to them. The next day, Polish President Ignacy Mościcki and Army Commander Edvard Ridge-Smigwy enter Romania. They are interned because Mościcki issues an official proclamation for Poles to continue the war and make their way to France, and is thus functioning as a belligerent regime on Romanian soil. The Germans protested, and the Romanians enforced international law rather than risk German intervention. And as the Soviets advanced, there was basically no defense against them because of the German invasion. The Russians have 2 army groups invading. The Polish have 18 battalions in the whole east of Poland. As for the rest of the week of war, on the 17th, British aircraft carriers are taken off of anti-U-boat patrols after the Courageous is sank by U-29. 518 sailors died. The following day, the British public hears the first broadcast of Lord Haw-Haw from Berlin.
Lord Haw-Haw.
Germany calling. Here are the Reichsender ambush. Station Bremen and Station DXB on the 31-meter bed.
Lord Haw-Haw is actually Irish-American William Joyce, and his broadcasts are German propaganda designed to demoralize the British people. By the 19th, Soviet advanced troops reach the Hungarian border. In the north, Vilna falls. The Soviets link up with the Germans at Brest-Litovsk, which is given to the Soviets as per the August 23rd secret agreement. On the 20th, Adolf Hitler enters Danzig and is given a huge welcome by the mostly German population. After this, he goes to the resort town of Sopot and meets with Karl Brandt, his personal doctor, Leonardo Conti, the chief German medical officer, and Philipp Buhler, Reichsleiter, the second highest political officer of the Nazi Party, just below Hitler himself. There,
I've never heard of him, I swear to God.
Hitler lays out his plans for killing the insane in Germany. He backdates his order to September 1st and gives the green light to give a merciful death to all those who are incurably ill.
Jeez, that is so fucked. She had a learning disability. He had epilepsy and had to die for it, bro.
The organization that will carry out the euthanasia program will be known...
How many people killed in World War II could have done such great things, right? And done great inventions in science and
as T4, and it's named after the address
Germany 2-0, link for the goal, please.
4 in Berlin.
Werner be a young boy.
Psychology and neurology professor
Imagine that. You put this fucking kid down, bro. Like, what happened to you that you'd fucking do that?
And the program will
religious delusions. The fuck?
Or the asylums for those to receive a merciful death. One of the doctors will explain the program like this. The idea is unbearable to me that the best, the flower of our youth, must lose its life at the front in order that feeble-minded and asocial elements can have a secure existence in the...
You guys are all history nerds. Can you fucking tell me some times during human history where shit was more evil? I mean, sure, you had shit like Vlad the Impaler, let's impale my enemies and stuff, but I don't know, the Hitler stuff is just on the highest order, man. It happens all the time, just in different parts of the world. We're playing My Little Pony. Well, also, we shouldn't overdo content like this.
Judged insane will be put to death in Germany.
Holy shit, I'm almost at 2K viewers slowly. Okay, fuck My Little Pony.
But not everyone is for Hitler's extreme agenda. The Einsatzgruppen, the SS task forces, have continued killing Jews in the towns that fell under German control. But on the 20th, the German 14th Army reports that a lot of the soldiers are really uneasy by what they call illegal measures taken by the SS task force assigned to them under General Udo von Boysch. Actually, one grievance from many fighting soldiers is that the SS men are not fighting at the front, but...
That's what I always wondered, right? You're a German soldier, you're fighting your ass off for Volk und Vaterland, and the SS is staying behind, man, eating good food?
Rather, against defenseless civilians. Field Marshal von Rundstedt, in charge of the whole Army Group South, then says Boysch's men will no longer be tolerated in the war zone. The crisis between the fighting soldiers and their SS counterparts is not going to resolve itself.
Lego.
Thing is, Reinhard Heydrich, who had formed the...
I remember this guy is also pure evil.
The Einsatzgruppen on Heinrich Himmler's instructions has a more ambitious plan.
Look at that guy. That guy looks...
On the 21st,
that guy fucks you up, dude.
an emergency conference in Berlin.
That guy will fuck you with a spike, though.
Of the task forces in Poland.
The Butcher of Bohemia.
In order to prepare for the ultimate goal, Polish Jews are to be concentrated in a few of the larger cities. Jews not living in those cities and any Jews living in Western Poland are to be sent to them. So Western Poland is going to be totally cleared of Jews. Now, once the Jews are in these cities, they will be limited to one quarter and not allowed to go to the rest of the city. There will even be a council of Jewish elders set up to ensure that all the movement of the Jews...
The Czech resistance killed Heydrich with a bomb? Hell yeah, man!
...happens on time. So they are going to reinstitute the medieval...
I never seen the Pianist. Never seen that.
This is a first step towards their final solution.
But it's no one like Jews, because you always look for scapegoats. Everybody always look for scapegoats. They always look for someone they can blame everything on. Like nowadays, refugees.
Of course, the task force killings don't stop because of this. At the end of the week, the Brandenburg Division reached Wrocławek.
I'm a guy nowadays, I don't like to watch heavy movies like The Pianist. I just want to hang. I don't want to see these. I know bad things happened. I don't need to be educated on that, and I don't like watching movies like that.
Where they will spend a few days blowing up synagogues, looting Jewish shops, and rounding up and murdering prominent Jews. I've talked about the Soviets in Europe, but what about the Soviet Union in Asia this week? Well, the armistice signed 8 days ago on the 15th between Japan and the Soviet Union goes into effect as this week begins. The fighting between the Soviets and Mongolians on one side and the Japanese on the other had gone on over the summer until the end of August. See, with the threat of war in Europe, Joseph Stalin had wanted to end the Japanese actions from Manchukuo, Japan's Manchurian puppet state. The Japanese, for their part, are worried about the threat of Bolshevik expansion.
I don't think that was AI generated, my buddy. It was just colorized
supplying
afterwards.
The Chinese, with whom Japan is currently at war, with T-26 tanks, money, and military advisors. Back in November 1936, Japan even signed the anti-Comintern, Communist International, pact with Germany, which Italy and Spain later signed, under which Germany recognized Manchukuo, and after which tension on the Mongolian border grew between Russia and Japan. There were border skirmishes in 1937.
Yeah, Life is Beautiful is a heavy movie.
The Changkufeng incident
He won an
in
Oscar for that.
1938. And Japan's Kwangtung army grew frustrated with Emperor Hirohito for not letting them attack the Soviets in force, whom they assumed, mistakenly, would not fight back. However, many Japanese politicians did not want a Mongolian war against the Soviet Union, but the Japanese army, without telling Tokyo, had issued an order to the commanders in the region to act as they saw fit on the spot, without consulting the general staff, hence the fighting all summer and eventual stalemate. By late August, General Zhukov was ready for his surprise attack, which we saw 3
He's like a good-looking man, right? He's a good-looking man. Looks like a football player, man.
weeks ago ended in overwhelming Soviet victory. During that attack, Germany and the Soviet Union had signed a pact of their own as German troops massed on the Polish border. The Japanese were stunned by the unexpected defeat, and this has far-reaching results. The Chinese, both the communists and nationalists, were emboldened and encouraged by it, of course, but the Japanese army and those who had favored striking north against the Soviets now fade from prominence, and those who favored striking south, led by the Navy, can have their day. So this summer series of battles, the battles of Khalkhin Gol, was a major influence on the future direction of Japanese aggression. But Japan needs a morale boost after the loss to the Russians, and this week they begin the first battle of Changsha against the Chinese.
That looks like artillery 0.5 in HOI4. What the fuck?
In a couple of weeks. And as the week comes to an end, the Soviets take Lvov, and Romanian Prime Minister Călinescu is murdered by the
Look at that guy. That's a Bond villain.
fascist organization, the Iron Guard. Polish independence has now nearly been extinguished as both the Germans and the Soviets advance, and the Soviets no longer have to worry about the Japanese. And Hitler lays out his plans for putting the insane in the Reich to death. And Heydrich tells his commanders to recreate the ghetto system in Poland in preparation for the final solution of what to do with the Jews. October 6th, 1939. When Germany invaded Poland, everyone thought that a successful invasion would take months, even considering the might of the German army. Then the USSR also invaded, and now, just 1 month from the war's beginning, the Polish armed forces...
I already know when I wake up tomorrow, some dude texted me a 2-page essay how to play Black Ice, man.
...is at an end. Last week, Warsaw fell to the Germans.
Actually, I only built fuel. I don't know if you're correct.
Both they and the Soviets continued their invasions of Poland. Germany and the USSR signed a treaty of friendship that partitioned Poland between them, and Adolf Hitler set his sights on Western Europe. Oddly enough, as of this week, Western Europe kind of now includes Poland. On September 30th, a new Polish government is set up in exile in Paris. Władysław Raczkiewicz is the new president, and General Władysław Sikorski, commander-in-chief of the armed forces and prime minister. Around 100,000 Polish troops managed to escape into either Hungary, Romania, or the Baltics, despite the efforts of the Russians and Germans. Now, I mentioned 2 weeks ago that the Polish government had crossed into Romania and been interned. That was because by issuing a proclamation for Poles to continue the fight and head to France, they were technically a belligerent regime on Romanian territory. And when the Germans protested, the Romanians complied with international law rather than risk German intervention. With now former President Ignacy Mościcki under house arrest, there was a real risk that Poland would be stuck without a government and a German puppet regime would be recognized by neutral nations. Mościcki nominates Raczkiewicz, and the first Paris meeting of the government in exile is October 2nd. Bucharest itself is flooded with Polish refugees, but most Romanian officials are pretty well disposed toward them. To leave Romania, though, you need a passport. So the Polish embassy is working overtime, and an exodus of Poles towards Yugoslavia or across the Black Sea.
And that must have been a shit time for normal civilians.
On October 5th, Raczkiewicz sends a message to the Polish people. It is not the first time in our history that the head of state and the national government has had to take refuge from the motherland, which has been overrun by the enemy. In the course of 1,000 years, we have defended more than
well, now all the Poles are in Germany.
Our existence and Christian civilization against the thirst for conquest and oppression by Germany and against her barbarous Oriental ally. I profoundly believe that the heroic contribution of Poland to the Anglo-French coalition war will not be in vain. It will result in final victory.
Well, he was right.
And speaking of the Orient and victory, those two words are quite topical this week. In China, the First Battle of Changsha ends this week. This is the first major battle of the Second Sino-Japanese War, the war between China and Japan that's been going on the past 2 years, to fall within the scope of this channel.
And Japan got very deep, huh?
Is considered by many to be part of the Second World War, though Japan's not allied with Germany or anything. But the war in Europe and the war in East Asia are affecting each other, as the Soviets are dealing with both the Japanese and the Germans. After a couple years of fighting, the Chinese war has become sort of a stalemate. But the Chinese army had just had a big morale boost when the Russians and Mongolians badly defeated the Japanese at the end of August, as we saw last month, and a successful attack on the Chinese now would in turn be a much-needed morale boost for the Japanese army. And the Soviets and Japanese have recently signed an armistice. So the Japanese could put them out of the picture for the time being and focus on trying to beat the Chinese and then installing a puppet government in central China, much as they have already done in Manchuria. Japanese forces were converging on Changsha by mid-September, and the battle began the 17th. Side note here. The attacks would include poison gas. The Japanese...
Bro, we just watched 6 videos, and there's more fucking war crimes than I've ever heard before. In just the first 6 weeks, dude.
The Geneva Protocol. By September 23rd, the Chinese had been driven from the Xinjiang River region, and Changsha had been surrounded on 3 sides. By the end of September, advanced Japanese troops had reached the outskirts of the city, but they had taken heavy casualties and were in danger of overstretching their supply lines, which were being constantly harassed and were possibly in danger of being cut altogether. So they withdrew. The Chinese pursue them straight away and begin a general counterattack October 3rd. Japanese General Yasuji Okamura
it's nice to hear about. I never heard about this. I know nothing about this. It's very nice to hear about this, man. It's a great channel. I know nothing about that shit.
Called off, but the Chinese shoot down the plane carrying the order. By the week's end, the Japanese are being destroyed and are in full retreat northward over the Miluo River. Within days, the Chinese will have retaken the territory they lost in Hunan, Hubei, and Jiangxi provinces. Changsha is the first major city that has managed to repel the Japanese advances. As you can imagine, it is a big boost.
I don't know, man. If I was Chinese, I'd be very mad at Japan nowadays. Like, there must be a lot of resentment in their culture for the Japanese.
And the Japanese are foiled for the time being from consolidating their gains in southern China. But in Europe, the Polish army's resistance is coming to an end as the Germans and Russians consolidated their gains. Admiral Unrug's garrison on Hel Peninsula finally surrenders to the Germans. On the 30th, a series of landmines are detonated. This nearly cuts off the peninsula from the mainland. Unrug is determined to fight, even after the surrender of Warsaw last week. But as October rolls in, he realizes it is futile. The garrison surrenders October 2nd. The last significant Polish units surrender this week. Some of the 3rd near Łódź, and then the Polish Independent Operation Group the 6th after the Battle of Kotsk. The Germans have taken 700,000 prisoners of war, and the Soviets 200,000.
How do you even feed these people, bro?
Polish casualties are heavy, an estimated 70,000 killed and 133,000 wounded. The Germans have 10,000 dead and 30,000 wounded.
6 weeks, man.
The available casualty estimates from the Soviet invasion are chilling. The Red Army is said to have lost 996 men killed and 2,002 wounded, while the Poles are said to have suffered 50,000 fatalities without any figure for the wounded.
That's true, though.
Such a figure can perhaps only be explained by executions. I'm going to throw in another quote here about the German invasion that's pretty interesting. Although tank units have played a notable part in the campaign, it is interesting to note that the contemporary German official appreciations lay more stress on the traditional style infantry battles. The tank forces are seen at this...
And man, you know, this kind of inspires me for Black Ice. In Poland and France, maybe green air and infantry is enough, you know? And then the tanks come later.
By enthusiasts like Guderian as little more than useful auxiliaries who can help the infantry do the real work.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do tomorrow.
On October 4th, Adolf Hitler issues an amnesty order to German troops who have killed prisoners or civilians, presuming that they have acted from bitterness over atrocities committed by Poles. The next day, the 5th, at the Victory Parade in Warsaw, Hitler says to the assembled foreign journalists,
Hitler looks so much like a villain, right? Did anyone ever look more like a villain, bro? It's like he was thinking, how can I look the most evil?
You have seen the ruins of Warsaw. Let that be a warning to those statesmen in London and Paris who still think
Kimsey,
of
man. Thank you, dude.
the war. That is to journalists.
Hillary Clinton.
The day after that, as the week ends, Hitler has a major speech to the Reichstag. He talks then of his desire for peace with Britain and France. He says he has no war aims against them and up to now has only corrected the unjust Versailles Treaty. He blames warmongers like Churchill for the current state of affairs and even calls for a conference to resolve their differences. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain says that to consider this would be to forgive Germany for its aggression. He and French Prime Minister Edouard Daladier tell Hitler, no way, Jose.
Can't make deals with these people.
They don't actually say Jose, but you know what I mean. There is a conference that takes place this week, though. The second Pan-American Conference is held the 2nd, with 21 nations participating. They establish a 300-mile, 480 kilometers, security zone off the American coast. Any act of war in this zone against anyone will be interpreted as a hostile attack on America. And the war at sea is, in fact, heating up. On the 30th, the German pocket battleship Graf Spee sinks its first merchant ship. On October 5th, 8 British and French hunting groups are formed to look for the Graf Spee. Now, the other pocket battleship on the loose, the Deutschland, sinks the Stonegate in the neutrality zone. Deutschland will also seize an American ship
that's going to be sick content, man.
This turns out to
I'll
be
play
a big
survival mode, though. If I die,
combined with the Polish invasion, this really helps turn American public opinion not just against the Germans, but against the Neutrality Acts, which banned loans or the sale of munitions to belligerents. Early next month, this will result in President Franklin Roosevelt getting a new Neutrality Act passed that allows the arms trade with belligerent nations, read Britain and France, on a cash-and-carry basis. The recipients will have to use their own ships, pay immediately in cash, still no loans, and assume all transportation risk. American shipping is forbidden from entering the war zone.
I'm excited to play the USA in Black Guys because you probably just chill in America, build whatever you want, and plan your D-Day.
Are some notes to end the week. On the 2nd, the Soviets threaten an occupation if they don't get to use military bases in Latvia. 3 days later, the Latvians and the USSR sign a 10-year mutual assistance pact. The Soviets can have 25,000 men on Latvian bases. This follows a similar agreement signed with the Estonians last week. Lithuania is now pressured to do likewise, but they are reluctant. And as the week ends, the Finns mobilize their standing army forces. A bit more about why next week.
Okay, number 7 next time. Boys, I'm tired as fuck. What are you still doing here, mate? Jeez. Well, if you want to see more, click these videos. Have fun. Looking good, boy.